So in Job chapter 20, Zophar is giving his final speech of the book. He is the third friend of Job listed, and he's the one who speaks basically in the third of every order that they talk, since they go in a set order every time. He has only spoken once so far. He only has 2 speeches, which is the least of anyone else in the entire book. And this is his direct response to what is frankly Job's most insightful and well put together answer yet, where he essentially abandoned the woes that he had constantly been talking about and focused much more on the hope that God was giving him in his life. And from this point on, I think he had hoped, he warned his friends and told them to look inward, to stop projecting all of their dark thoughts onto him and assuming that he was responsible for all of his own woes because it came from inside of them too. And after he said that, it offended them quite a bit, as we'll see with Zophar and following Job's next retort, Eliphaz as well. From this point on, Job starts focusing on his own issues a lot less and focuses much more on their arguments and on the future that God is promising. So first I would like to point out, Zophar's first speech was very basic in its nature. He called Job a liar and accused him of several sins, but nothing more than Eliphaz and Bildad had. And most of his short discourse was focused on trying to call Job back to repentance, telling him the wicked suffer, but the righteous have all these great things. And if you repent, then you'll have this, and you'll be given this, and you'll get that, and you'll have it all right back. But if you're wicked and you stay wicked, then you'll be punished. It was much gentler, even though it was accusatory. But we see in chapter 20 here, that is no longer the case. Zophar no longer has any desire to be gentle. Like Bildad before him, he starts making very pointed accusations, really more insinuations about Job. So we see in the beginning, Zophar then answered Zophar the Naamathite and said, "Therefore do my thoughts cause me to answer, and for this I make haste. I have heard the check of my reproach, and the spirit of my understanding causeth me to answer. Knowest thou not this of old, since man was placed upon earth?" So he begins with a therefore, which is pretty strangely placed because the thing that he is saying it's there for, he then speaks about. He's not actually referring back to anything. He's putting a therefore before the thing it's supposed to be there for, which is a very strange way to speak. And what he's essentially stating here when he says that he has heard the check of his reproach, he has heard Job's response to his rebukes of Job. He has heard what Job has said in reply, and now he must answer in the spirit of his understanding, and in verse 2, his own thoughts cause him to answer. This here lays out how Zophar thinks very clearly and how he argues. He has no evidence. He has no actual basis on which he grounds what he states. It's simply what he's thinking. It's his own spirit. It's his own thoughts. And that's how he presents his arguments. And he will, throughout this chapter, refer to them the same way. But he also uses a very logical flaw right here in chapter 4, or verse 4. "Knowest thou not this of old, since man was placed upon earth?" He's essentially stating this is a thing people have known since men have been here. This is common knowledge. You should know this. This is a logical flaw in an argument known as the appeal to authority, where you essentially state because someone else stated this, or lots of other people stated this, it must be true. That is, of course, not how you logically come to conclusions, and it's not how you actually argue a point. Just because someone said something, no matter who they are, unless they're God, it doesn't make it true. This is the same argument that has been used before. Bildad did it in chapter 8. Eliphaz did it in chapter 15. Both of them used the same circular reasoning to state that because they said it, then it must be true and they're on our side. Now, on top of this being a logical flaw, the old men of the world don't bear this out. All the information we have on what people spoke about in the past and the little bits of writing that seem to indicate it showed that this is always, the way that the world is now is the way that it's pretty much always been. The evil do prosper, they oppress the righteous don't fight back as much because they're not wicked and they don't try to hurt them. And in response to that, the evil gain more power, more wealth, they get stronger in the earth, and the righteous are made a byword, short of miraculous intervention from God, as in the case of Job, where he was made very mighty only because of the favor that God had given him. And that is the only reason, otherwise he would have been stepped on by the wicked people around him. That is the nature of the world, that is what history bears out, and so their assertions, while also illogical, are just flatly incorrect. What he's about to state is not something that's been known since the days of old. So in verse 5, he says, that the triumphing of the wicked is short, and the joy of the hypocrite but for a moment. Though his excellency mount up to the heavens, and his head reach unto the clouds, yet he shall perish forever like his own dung. They which have seen him shall say, Where is he? He shall fly away as a dream, and shall not be found. Yea, he shall be chased away as a vision of the night. The eye also which saw him shall see him no more, neither shall his place any more behold him. His children shall seek to please the poor, and his hands shall restore their goods. So, what he's starting here is a long series of curses on the wicked man specifically, but it's really an indirect but pretty obvious reproach of Job. He's trying to say that because this is the stuff that happens to a wicked man, and then it's happened to you, then you're a wicked man. It's the same argument Bildad used before, and we will see as it continues that it does get rather pointed at Job, though not quite as aggressive as Bildad's was. Verse 10 refers to children pleasing the poor. What this essentially means is when a man is wealthy, builds up a lot of wealth, and then he dies, normally his children get that wealth. If the children don't have any wealth, then they have to work for their own money going forward if he didn't pass anything down. What Zophar is saying is the children will be so poor, the children of the wicked man will be so poor because of his wicked life, that they'll be working just to please the poor people of their society. The second part of it, his hands shall restore their goods, is written a bit strangely. The word restore here is translated to repeat, retreat, or return. It can mean any of the three, basically to do something again, to fall back to another position, or the normal way that we would read it, which is to give something back or take it back. I believe what he's stating here, given the context of the verse, he's saying that the father, the wicked father, will have to take their goods away from them that he's given them, for one reason or another, to pay debts or keep people from harming him. But it's hard to tell for certain. Now in verse 11, he says, his bones are full of the sin of his youth, which shall lie down with him in the dust. Now this is a very clear, at least in my opinion, direct personal attack against Job. In chapter 13, Job stated in one verse that he felt as though God was not honoring the bargain he made with mankind, where he'd put your sin away if you sacrificed for it and repented of it. This isn't true, that's not the bargain that God made. He did not say that if you sacrifice for sin, then there will be no punishment for it. Simply that it shows faith in the coming Redeemer. That was all that it was ever about. So Job should have known better. But in his eyes, he had committed all these sins of his youth, and he still felt the guilt for them. He had not forgotten them. They were still heavy on his mind, and when the bad things came for him, he believed it was because of those sins he had committed even a long time ago. And what Zophar is saying right here is that the wicked man feels the exact same way, that he can never get away from the sins of his youth. They're always with him. Even when he dies in the dust, they're there with him. That is a very direct attack against Job, much like the ones that Bildad had before. But this one's more personal, while the others were more about focusing on his loss and his family rather than his own insufficiency as a righteous man. In verse 12, he says, though wickedness be sweet in his mouth, though he hide it under his tongue, though he spare it and forsake it not, but keep it still within his mouth, yet his meat in his bowels is turned. It is the gall of asps within him. He hath swallowed down riches, and he shall vomit them up again. God shall cast them out of his belly. He shall suck the poison of asps, the viper's tongue shall slay him. This, I believe, is a reference to Job's sickness. Job was, of course, sick. It seems that wasn't very common, especially sickness that severe, even in their day. And so what he's saying is, if you're a wicked man, then you're going to get this terrible sickness. It's going to cause you, it's going to be like poison in your body. It's going to cause you to vomit out all your food, which is in line with how Job has complained about his food situation so far. The food he does get, which isn't good, he has a miserable time eating. It's painful, and he can barely keep anything down. This seems to be another reference to that. The friends of Job don't seem to have any original thoughts in their brain. They continue to recycle the same things because this is the same sort of argument that his friends have made before, pointing to everything that's bad that's happened to him and saying, it's what happens to a wicked man. So they're doing the same thing with his sickness once again. In verse 17, he says, he shall not see the rivers, the floods, the brooks of honey and butter. That which he labored for shall he restore, and shall not swallow it down. According to his substance shall the restitution be, and he shall not rejoice therein. Because he hath oppressed and hath forsaken the poor, because he hath violently taken away an house which he builded not. Surely he shall not feel quietness in his belly. He shall not save of that which he desired. There shall none of his meat be left. Therefore shall no man look for his goods. So, what he's saying for when he says that which he hath labored for in verse 18, he doesn't mean that he worked to build all this stuff up. He means that he worked to take it away from people who built it. In verse 19, he says he hath oppressed and forsaken the poor. To oppress the poor, to forsake the poor is simple. It means that you You close up your pockets and you don't give them anything when you're able to and they need it. But to oppress them is much more than just turning away from them. That means you're taking from them. You're taking advantage of them, seizing what they have because they have no one to defend themselves. It was this very sin, well, this was one of the major reasons that God judged Israel and Judah, was because they were doing this to their poor people in very terrible and direct ways. And they are accusing Job of doing the same thing. This is not the first time this accusation's been laid against him, but it is the first time that it was so direct and clear and aggressively laid against him. They are accusing Job of gaining all of his wealth by mistreating the people around him, which is a terrible slander, something that it's clear Job did the exact opposite of. He went out of his way to help the people around him, to give them counsel, to give them support when they needed it, and he would do it to his friends, something that they are not doing now. Job is now the poor man, and the very thing Zophar is accusing him of doing, Zophar is himself doing to Job, who is the poor. This is very common with mankind. We get it stuck in our heads when we're in the middle of committing sin that other people are committing it and we're not. It's a very easy trap to fall into, much more so when you are in denial about the nature of reality itself, which Job's three friends are. They don't want to admit that God is sovereign, and they have no assurance of wealth and power and comfort on earth. They don't want to face that fact. And so because of that, it's very easy for them to get lost in the weeds of their own thoughts, their own fears, and start judging hypocritically, which is exactly what they're doing to Job. We could assume that the other accusations they lay against him, they are also guilty of, but that is just an assumption. But it's clear from what they're doing to him right now that this accusation is something they are actively participating in right now against Job. And it is something that we have never seen Job participate in either. And there doesn't seem to be any indication that he was. In verse 22, he says, "In the fullness of his sufficiency, he shall be in straits. Every hand of the wicked shall come upon him. When he is about to fill his belly, God shall cast the fury of his wrath upon him, and shall rain it upon him while he is eating. He shall flee from the iron weapon, and the bow of steel shall strike him through. It is drawn and cometh out of the body. Yea, the glittering sword cometh out of his gall. Terrors are upon him." This, I believe, is all a direct reference to the Sabians and the Chaldeans, who plagued Job early on. They took his flocks, well, some of his flocks, some of them were consumed with fire from heaven. But two of his flocks, of his large groups, were seized by Sabians and Chaldeans, which are eastern bandits, and they were taken. I believe this is him referencing that. He's got to throw in all of the different trials that Job has gone through, and so he has to reference the people who abused him. This is something also that Job has talked about suffering from, and that his other friends have also said happens to wicked men, that they're pursued by other evil men who want to take advantage of them. Most of it's pretty simple. There is a couple points of interest throughout it. In verse 24, he states, "The bow of steel shall strike him through." Now, there are some commentators and translators who will, well, not really translators, mostly commentators, who will state that instead of steel, it's better translated brass or bronze, because that's what our modern scientists like to tell us people worked with then. They say that there was a Stone Age, then there was bronze, and then they moved on to iron later, and they didn't have steel till much later. But it's pretty clear that's not the case. People had metalworking, advanced metalworking prior to the flood. I see no reason why early mankind after the flood would not also have had access to that. The word steel was chosen here very deliberately, and it's not the same word translated bronze and brass throughout the rest of the Old Testament. It could refer to one of those, but it doesn't seem to. And so it's interesting that they may have had steel. Verse 25 also has a very specific term in here that is only appears one other place in the Bible that I've found, where he talks about the glittering sword coming out of his gall. Now, gall is just another word for the gallbladder. It's a non-essential organ, but if it gets pierced and it's not surgically removed, then it will certainly lead to a very painful death. And so what he's really talking about is a mortal wound. It's the same thing as Job talking about God striking him in his reigns, essentially causing him a mortal wound he can never recover from. But the reason that the glittering sword is interesting is because it is the same terminology we see in Deuteronomy 32. Deuteronomy 32 is the Song of Moses, back in Deuteronomy if you want to turn there, which was essentially went over a bunch of the history of the Israelites, mostly from escaping Egypt, being led through the desert, and then in towards the Promised Land, because Deuteronomy is right before Moses died, and they actually went into the Promised Land. He's essentially giving final instructions to the children of Israel. And in it, the Lord says, let me see if I can make sure I have the right start. In verse 39, see now that I, even I, am he, and there is no God with me. I kill and I make alive. I wound and I heal. Neither is there any that can deliver out of my hand. For I lift up my hand to heaven and say, I live forever. If I whet my glittering sword and mine hand take hold on judgment, I will render vengeance to mine enemies and will reward them that hate me. For I will make mine arrows drunk with blood, and my sword shall devour flesh, and that with the blood of the slain and of the captives from the beginning of revenges upon the enemy. Rejoice, O ye nations, with his people, for he will avenge the blood of his servants, and will render vengeance to his adversaries, and will be merciful unto his land and to his people. So, Deuteronomy was, of course, written long after the events in Job transpired. Most people believe that the book of Job was written by Job himself or by Elihu, who hasn't appeared in the book yet through our studies, but he appears a bit later. I believe it was written by Job. There are some people who believe that it wasn't written down yet, that it was oral history passed down through generations and was taken from Moses when he sojourned throughout that region and was living with Jethro for a while. Jethro lived in the same region as where we believe Job was, which is the area around Edom. And so it could have been a very popular tale, essentially, there, a story of history that he recorded. I believe that Job wrote it. Some people believe it was Moses, though, and it may have influenced some of Moses's writings. However, we also know that the entire Bible was written by direct inspiration from God. The men did not choose the words. God did. Even though some of their personality comes through it, it was not their decision. God specifically used the term glittering sword later in Deuteronomy, and it's the only other place that you see it in the entire Bible. I don't know if it was a colloquialism at the time that was referred to, that the glittering sword was a reference to God's impending judgment specifically, but it seems to be an interesting coincidence that it appears here. I believe that it was Zophar attempting to tie it back to God's judgment directly, saying that the sufferings you've had by mankind, the men who chased you down, it wasn't just happenstance. It wasn't just some random bandits who saw an opportunity and took it. This was judgment from God. The wounds and swords that they inflicted on you, that was his glittering sword. That's what it seems to be saying to me. But I am not 100% sure. I simply think it's interesting that specific term appears only here and in Deuteronomy in that context. Now in verse 26 to 29, Zophar paints a very grim, hopeless picture for this wicked man that he's talking about. All darkness shall be hid in his secret places. A fire not blown shall consume him. It shall go ill with him that is left in his tabernacle. The heaven shall reveal his iniquity, and the earth shall rise up against him. The increase of his house shall depart, and his goods shall flow away in the day of his wrath. This is the portion of a wicked man from God, and the heritage appointed unto him by God. So he's saying he'll lose everything. He'll have darkness in all of his places. He won't be able to see anything. A fire not blown, essentially a fire that continues to rage, nothing's putting it out, will consume his tabernacle. As we've gone over before, tabernacle can refer to a physical habitation. It means a tent is its direct literal translation. But it usually refers to just any sort of actual habitation or a person's body. It often refers to a person's body as well. And either one of those fits pretty well here. The wicked man loses everything he has. He loses his life at the end, of course. He says, the heaven shall reveal his iniquity, the earth shall rise up against him. Now, this could just be flowery language of him saying all of creation will come against you. It could also be him specifically saying God is going to judge you directly. He's going to bring nature itself against you. And it could be a direct reference to the fire from heaven that's already consumed some of Job's flock as well. He says, the increase of his house shall depart, his goods shall flow away in the day of his wrath. This is the portion of a wicked man from God. Now, Zophar is not strictly wrong. Wicked men do suffer consequences for their actions. That does happen in the world. But it is by no means the law of the world that if you commit wicked deeds, then you lose everything that you have on the planet, and then you are killed and cut off, and your descendants have nothing. That is very clearly not the world that we live in. And it wasn't what the world that they lived in then either. His assertions that this is what people have known of old are flat lies. And they have been the entire time his friends have been stating them. As I've stated before, it's simply them trying to get out of the reality that they want so desperately to avoid confronting, which is that they have no assurance, even though they want it, none on this earth at least. And that's the last time that Zophar speaks to Job that we have a record of, essentially telling him, it's hopeless, you've lost everything, you're going to die, and you deserve it. That's essentially the last words that Zophar has to his friend Job. And the last words that the other friends speak to Job aren't much better. Bildad's is less accusatory, just as foolish. It's very short what he has left to say. Eliphaz's last discourse is much more aggressive. But between Zophar and Eliphaz's, we have chapter 21, which is Job's answer to what Zophar has claimed. But Job answered and said, hear diligently my speech, and let this be your consolations. Suffer me that I may speak, and after that I have spoken, mock on. So Job first answers with a request, that his friends show him one comfort, because they haven't shown him any so far. He's saying, well, you're not going to show me any other comfort. Let this be the comfort that you show me. Let me answer you. Let me speak and don't interrupt. And then once I'm done with that, keep mocking. He has crossed the point of expecting any good from his friends and from their arguments. He expects nothing but accusations and foolishness, and he is now focused on tearing those arguments down. He states in verse 4 that his complaint is not with them. As for me, is my complaint to man? And if it were so, why should not my spirit be troubled? Mark me and be astonished, and lay your hand upon your mouth. Even when I remember, I am afraid, and trembling taketh hold on my flesh. So he's stating his complaint's not with man, it's with God. That's the implication of if it isn't with man, who else could it be with? It's with God. It's consistent with everything that he's complained about so far. He wants an answer from God as to why this is all happening. And he's said before repeatedly that it isn't about you to his friends, and yet they continue to make it about man-to-man interactions. Job states that were his complaint to man, then he should be troubled. If it were just to man, then he should be troubled, because his friends are not at all listening to any words he's saying. He's defending himself logically and soundly, and their responses are vicious and cruel. So he's saying in verse 4, why should not my spirit be troubled if it were so? That's what he states about if it were to man. This is just a sort of a prick that he throws at his friends in the middle of this. It's not really the point of what he's saying, but he is making a point of pointing out their cruelty, as he did in chapter 19. In verse 5, he says, mark me and be astonished, lay your hand upon your mouth. His point here is to try and get them to understand that what they're saying is simply wrong. It doesn't make any sense. He is not the wicked man they're accusing him of. Everything in his life has borne out the exact opposite of that. That this has happened to him should be an astonishment, not a thing they say, well, obviously this happened to you. Who else would it happen to? He's saying this should be shocking. You should be surprised this happened. And because of that, you should keep your hand over your mouth so that you don't say something stupid. You should reserve your speech. You should listen, be patient, and come to a judgment later instead of jumping to a conclusion now. And in verse 6, he states that even he, when he remembers, is afraid, and trembling takes hold on his flesh. He doesn't understand why this is happening either. He doesn't have the answer that they all really want. He's tried to postulate them before. As Zophar put his finger on, Job stated that he thought it was because of his past sins. But his conclusion is as incorrect as theirs as to why this is happening. He just wants to know why it is happening. What he does know is that the accusations they're leveling against him are wrong. And because of that, they should stop talking because they're digging a pit deeper for themselves. At the end of chapter 19, he warned them, and it's not the first warning he's given them, that they should stop speaking for God or there will be consequences. God will not let it slide. And so that's essentially what he's trying to do here. In verse 7 and going forward, however, he starts to expound on why it's surprising that it's happened to him, specifically if they're correct. Wherefore do the wicked live, become old, yea, are mighty in power. Their seed is established in their sight with them, and their offspring before their eyes. Their houses are safe from fear, neither is the rod of God upon them. Their bull gendereth and faileth not. Their cow calveth and casteth not her calf. They send forth their little ones like a flock, and their children dance. They take the timbrel and harp and rejoice at the sound of the organ. They spend their days in wealth, and in a moment go down to the grave. So what he's pointing out is that most of the wicked people, they lead powerful, wealthy, safe, enjoyable lives surrounded by family and lots of affluence, which is what we see in the world now. People complain, usually very bad people also, will complain about the billionaires and the world leaders who are running everything into the ground. The fact is the only reason that happens is because the people who are on the actual ground level, all the people who work for them, let them do that. But even if they didn't, it's clear even to the wicked people of the world that wicked people are the ones who are powerful and wealthy, and they live long lives usually. This happens all the time. I've pointed out specifically Genghis Khan before. He's a great example because he murdered tens of thousands, if not millions, and he at least led to the deaths of millions. He raped countless women, and at the end of his life, he was in his 80s, died in his bed peacefully while passing down everything he had to his son. So what they claim, that his son was, the sons of these people live in poverty and they lose everything in their lives and die early, that's simply not what happens. It's not almost ever what happens. It does sometimes, just like it does to the righteous at times. It's not about the actions that they have committed. What they state is simply wrong. That's essentially what Job is getting to the point of. They are just asserting things that they have no real grounding or reality around. Verse 13 almost sounds like a passage from Ecclesiastes. They spend their days in wealth and in a moment go down to the grave, essentially pointing out how futile it is to try and focus on wealth your whole life. And in the day that Ecclesiastes was written, men didn't live much longer, if at all longer, than we do now. Back in Job's day, men lived much longer than we do now. And even then, he's saying it was pointless to build up wealth and live around it for all this time because you'll just die and go down into the grave. The point here is that there is no difference. There is a difference beyond, which he'll get into, but as far as how you're treated here on earth, righteous or wicked, God will do what he wants to do. There is no consistent rule you can apply to determine whether someone is wicked or righteous based on what they have in life. That's simply foolishness. In verses 14 and 15, we see a clear picture of a secular religious man. Therefore they say unto God, depart from us, for we desire not the knowledge of thy ways. What is the Almighty that we should serve him? And what profit should we have if we pray unto him? So these are men who refuse to believe and trust in God, who may even be living a good life by human standards, but they don't care about God. They don't care at all to pray to him, to live according to his words, to follow any of his instructions. They don't see any profit in it, and you could see that in verse 15. What is the Almighty that we should serve him? The first question. Who is God? Why should I do what he wants? That's just an act of rebellion, of course. Someone who denies the existence of their Creator states that he has no business telling them what to do. Pure, open rebellion with no ifs, ands, or buts about it. The second half of that is the one that you most often see. People say that prayer is pointless. It doesn't do anything. They say, what profit should we have if we pray unto him? Prayer, of course, as we know, it does plenty. But it doesn't, prayer is not it's not a genie in a bottle that you could simply make a wish and get what you want. But that is how these secular type of people view it. That's how the wicked men will view it. And that's how they live. I mean, you just talk to them. They'll tell you this very openly. And clearly, they told Job the same thing when he tried to talk to them about this, because he knew what they were going to say. In verse 16, lo, their good is not in their hand. The counsel of the wicked is far from me. So what he means by the good is not in their hand, the good he's referring to is their possessions, the wealth, the family, all the good things that they have. Not good as in their morally good actions, good as in the opposite of the bad things that could happen to them. He's saying it's not about them. They don't hold on to the good things that they have, and they didn't build it in the first place. God gave it to them. It's not in their hand. They can't even properly get rid of or acquire more of it unless he wants them to. That's the only way that they have any change over this. And yet, they're still saying, why should we serve him? Who is he? Why should we pray to him? Job points all this out, and the whole point of it is just the end of verse 16. The counsel of the wicked is far from me. His point in saying this is all clear. We all know this. Just look at my life. My life is the opposite of this. I don't live that way. I don't speak that way. I don't think this way. The counsel of the wicked, meaning what they believe, their ideas and their understanding, is far from him. It doesn't even cross his mind to think this way. So he isn't wicked. He's trying to point out the dichotomy between him and the wealthy wicked men who he is comparing what he was when he was powerful to. And to try to get his friends to understand there are plenty of these wicked men who live very prosperous lives and currently are not being punished for it. Now, this is not only to disprove the statements of his friends, but also to show that because his mind is so different, that he doesn't need to repent of the things they're accusing him of. If he repented, it wouldn't make a difference. He doesn't believe the things that they accuse him of believing. He hasn't done the things they accuse him of doing. One of the things that you see Zophar speak in verse 12 of chapter 20, though wickedness be sweet in his mouth, though he hide it under his tongue, though he spare it and forsake it not, but keep it still within his mouth. He's saying that wicked men will be very tricky about how they're evil. They'll keep it hidden and secretive. Job is trying to state that that's not what they do. And it's pretty true. There are some people who are very good deceivers. They're very effective at tricking people into thinking that they're good and righteous. But for the most part, wicked men don't do that. They're very open about their wickedness, even if they don't call it wickedness. They're open about the wicked things they often do. You see this especially with the LGBTQ group in our country and really around the world. They're very proud of what they are. They hold literal pride days. I'd like to know when they're going to get to the other sins. But they hold days for pride specifically, pride in their disgusting actions. And they're not the only ones who do this. But it is probably the most in-your-face example that I could come up with on short notice. This is how the wicked operate, more often than not. They are openly wicked, they gain all sorts of things from their wickedness, and then they start bragging about their wickedness and the great things they've had from it. Zophar's statement that they keep it in their mouths and it tears them apart from the inside just really doesn't happen pretty much ever. There are times that it happens. God taketh the crafty in their own words, he states that, but he doesn't always operate that way, and these people often get away with a lot of very evil things very openly. In verse 17 of chapter 21, how oft is the candle of the wicked put out, and how oft cometh their destruction upon them? God distributeth sorrows in his anger. They are as stubble before the wind, and as chaff that the storm carrieth away. God layeth up his iniquity for his children. He rewardeth him, and he shall know it. His eyes shall see his destruction, and he shall drink of the wrath of the Almighty. For what pleasure hath he in his house after him, when the number of his months is cut off in the midst? So he's showing a different direction now at this point, contrasting it to what came before. This is about the judgment that wicked men do face because they do face judgment. This is done at God's pleasure. He makes that very clear in verse 17. God distributed sorrows in his anger. He determines when people get punished. It's not a response to everything wicked that they do. They receive punishment at God's pleasure and not before. And it's not out of any obligation to a standard that man sets. That much is for certain. He points out that the judgment, more often than not, results in loss for their posterity. In verse 19, God layeth up his iniquity for his children. Most powerful men want to gain a lot of power, first to live a nice life for themselves, but oftentimes, even the evil ones, to leave generational wealth and power for their children, for those that come after them. This is very common. Genghis Khan, I've talked about many times. His son was in the room with him when he died. He gave him the bow that symbolized basically rulership of the horde, and then told the people to follow him, and they did. They stormed further into Europe and continued massacring in his name. He gave it all to his son, and that happens routinely. Evil men want to pass down what they have to their children. Part of it is because it's a natural inclination. We want, even when we're evil and selfish, the natural part of us, the natural affection, wants to make our children's lives easier than ours, even when we take advantage of people. But part of it is also just pride. If you know in your dying day that your son is going to carry on an entire empire in your name, you feel proud about that. It's pointless to, because you're going to die and it isn't going to matter, but they do feel the pride and they focus on it. That's a thing they build up for. And according to God's own judgments, that he layeth up iniquity unto the 6th and 7th generation, that's exactly what Job is talking about right here. And that's not to say that he punishes the children for their father's actions. God has laid out a clear principle where he doesn't do that. He doesn't hold you accountable for your parents' sins, nor does he hold a parent accountable for their child's sins. What he does do, however, is punishes the parent by taking away the things they worked for. If a parent makes $10 million and they give it all to their child before they die, but they did that through ill-gotten means, and then the child loses those $10 million because the parent should have never had them in the first place, the child is the one who lost that money. But it wasn't really a punishment on that child. And the child didn't really lose out anything at the end of the day. He just didn't get the ill-gotten gains. He still has as much as he had before that. It's a different way to look at it. Sometimes children do suffer much more harsh punishments because of what their parents have done, but it's because sowing and reaping is a principle that God cannot simply abolish. People are tied together. When you do something, it impacts those around you. And when you do something wicked, you're inviting judgment on the entire area around you. And when other people join in on that wickedness, then it continues to expand. We see that in the book of Exodus when, I cannot remember his name, the Israelite took the gold from Jericho after the walls fell, and they were told to take nothing. He took gold and he took raiment, and then he tried to hide it. And when he was found out, him and his family were killed. But it's clear a little bit later, some of his sons survived, but some of them did not. And his wife didn't either. That was because they were complicit. It was his sin, but they complied with it, so they suffered for it as well. And as a result, his surviving family was now worse off because they had lost family and they had lost honor among their brethren, who now looked at them as lesser because of what that other man had done. But they weren't destroyed for it. They didn't suffer the full weight of the sin. It's simply that his actions had consequences. Job points out this is more often than not how the truly wicked suffer in life. They build up all of this stuff. They lay it down for their children, and then they lose it. God takes from them what they made, but he doesn't have to do it while they're alive on this earth. He oftentimes does it to their children. Sometimes they do see it, as he states in verse 20. His eyes shall see his destruction. He shall drink of the wrath of the Almighty. Sometimes they do directly see it, but whether they do or not, they are in hell once they die, and they certainly get punished there. And Job has laid out that he already knows there is judgment for the wicked. He told the others, the people of the city and his friends in the past, when he had his first twinge of actual hope in his statements, that when they all died, when they went down to the earth, they would see why he had hope. That was a rebuke against them, that they needed to repent because he was going to paradise and they were not. They were going to see why he had hope and they didn't, and they needed to fix their ways. He knew what happened when you died. And so he knows that when these people die, they suffer eternal torment. But he also knows that the punishments they suffer here on earth are not what he suffered every time. Sometimes that does happen. Sometimes the wicked do lose everything and become destitute paupers here on earth. But that is not the norm, and it is by no means a principle that God abides by or is held by. In verse 22, Job continues, "Shall any teach God knowledge, seeing he judgeth those that are high? One dieth in his full strength, being wholly at ease and quiet. His breasts are full of milk, and his bones are moistened with marrow. And another dieth in the bitterness of his soul, and never eateth with pleasure. They shall lie down alike in the dust, and the worms shall cover them." So this part of it is just him comparing the mighty wicked people of the earth and then all of the weak people of the earth. He's saying, do you know more than God to tell him what he's going to do to the wicked men? He's the one who judges the mighty. He's the one who judges the high people of the earth, and he judges them the same as the poor. One interesting thing, in verse 24, it says his breasts are full of milk. This is a strange case because the word translated breast here is not the same one translated breast anywhere else in the Bible. This word appears only here, and it refers specifically to jugs or receptacles or containers. I'm not sure why they translated it with the word breast. It doesn't seem to fit particularly well, but that is what the word directly translated means, is just containers in general. And so he points to a man who has, well stocked up everything he's got. He's powerful, he's mighty on the earth. And another man dieth in the bitterness of his soul. Well, that's Job. Job is in the bitterness of his soul. He's poor, he's destitute, he's in pain, he suffers everything, he has no prospects for the future. He says, when we both die, we go to the same place, the worms devour us both. It doesn't matter how he judges us here on earth. The judgment comes after that. And that's the important part. Now, he's laid all this out, and normally it's after refuting his friend's arguments that Job would turn, historically speaking, to complaining about his situation and asking God to kill him. That's what we've seen him do many times before. But he doesn't do that in this statement. In verse 27, he says, "Behold, I know your thoughts and the devices which ye wrongfully imagine against me. For ye say, where is the house of the prince? And where are the dwelling places of the wicked? Have ye not asked them that go by the way, and do ye not know their tokens? That their wicked is reserved to the day of destruction. They shall be brought forth to the day of wrath. Who shall declare his way to his face? And who shall repay him what he hath done? Yet shall he be brought to the grave, and shall remain in the tomb. The clods of the valley shall be sweet unto him, and every man shall draw after him, as there are innumerable before him." So, verse 27, he's now, for the first time, proactively going after his friend's arguments. He already knows what they're going to answer with. He said the wicked are powerful, mighty. They have all this great wealth, these great houses. And he knows that his friends are going to respond with, well, who? Where? I don't see them. That doesn't enter into my heart and my thoughts, because it's the same way they've been arguing so far. So he's going to cut them off at the pass and just stop them before they get to the point where they start saying this. And then in verse 29, this is a more stinging rebuke than it might initially sound. "Have ye not asked them that go by the way, and do ye not know their tokens?" He's saying, have you ever talked with anyone outside of your own circle? Anyone on the side of the street? There's a road right there in the city. Go talk to someone on it and ask them who the wicked and powerful are in the world. Who are righteous and who's wicked and who's poor and who's mighty, and see what they say. Everyone knows. That's essentially what he's saying is a layman knows more than you. You old men who consider yourselves wise and counselors and very mighty on the earth, you're idiots, you're fools. You don't know a thing. The layman who's walking down the road knows more about this than you. That's essentially what verse 29 means to his friends. And in verse 30, he says that the wicked is reserved to the day of destruction. They shall be brought forth to the day of wrath. Now this is a very interesting passage. This shows that Job knows there is a day of judgment coming specifically. Now, this could just be a general assumption. He knows that the wicked are punished, so he assumes there is a time set for that, or that he himself has prophetic knowledge of that, because many prophets see the end times. I think it could be possibly the second one, but I think it's more likely that he simply knows the prophecies God has given so far. If we go to Jude, verse 14, we will see, I think, the only recorded prophecy that we know is actually a prophecy of Enoch prior to the flood. In Jude 14, And Enoch also, the seventh from Adam, prophesied of these, saying, Behold, the Lord cometh with 10,000s of his saints, to execute judgment upon all, and to convince all that are ungodly among them of all their ungodly deeds, which they have ungodly committed, and of all their hard speeches, which ungodly sinners have spoken against him. These are murmurers, complainers, walking after their own lusts, and their mouth speaketh great swelling words, having men's persons in admiration because of advantage. This is a very stinging rebuke against the men of Enoch's day, when the world was full of violence. And it was not supposed to be, of course. Men were not supposed to be killing each other in that day. We're not really supposed to just be killing each other in droves now, but we have authority to kill murderers. They didn't then, and they were killing each other. They were not supposed to be doing that. And Enoch was rebuking them. Apparently, apostasy was very common in that day. Men were flattering each other. They truly considered themselves very wise. And because the whole subject of Jude is, of course, apostasy, him bringing up Enoch into that conversation is no accident. But you'll notice, even from then, there was a prophesied day of destruction. Enoch prophesied that God would return with 10,000s of his saints to visit destruction upon the wicked. That was the promise of God since before the flood. Now, people could assume, well, that's talking about the flood. That was the judgment that he was seeing. But I don't recall God storming the world with 10,000s of his saints during the time of the flood. I don't remember seeing that in the Bible anywhere. What he did was flood the earth with water. But I see no resurrected believers there or angels who were involved in that. That was God, and that was his weather. So that day that was prophesied by Enoch has not yet occurred. I believe that's what Job is referring to here in verse 30, that he knows the prophecies of Enoch because it's very likely he heard it from a second or third-hand account. Enoch was gone before the flood, of course. Job could never have met him. But Enoch's grandson was Noah, which means his great-grandsons were Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And Noah was alive at the time of Enoch's life. We don't know if Noah's sons were born yet. It's pretty likely, though, that they were. But Noah certainly was, and Noah himself was a preacher and prophet. I have no doubts in my mind at all that he heard what his grandfather had to say. We don't know exactly when Job takes place, but it wasn't that long after the flood. At the very latest, I'd say he was a contemporary of Abraham. Now, that seems to be the latest he could have been around, but he may have been before Abraham as well. And Shem, at least, lived a very long time after the flood. I believe he was older or died just before Abraham did, or lived longer or died just before. But he was a contemporary at the same time. Job, being a wise man and a man of God, would undoubtedly have had contact with these sort of people. He may have known Noah himself. So I believe he had heard second or third-hand accounts of this very specific prophecy from Enoch, and that's what he's referencing here. It's important to remember that even then, back when there was no written word of God yet, they did have prophecy from the Lord, and they did know things about their future. In verse 31, he says, Who shall declare his way to his face, and who shall repay him what he hath done? Yet shall he be brought to the grave, and shall remain in the tomb. The clods of the valley shall be sweet unto him, and every one shall draw after him, as there are innumerable before him. So, Job, verse 31 is a rhetorical question. He's asking, who's going to visit vengeance on the evil man? Who's going to confront him for the wickedness that he has done, that we've laid out so far? There's going to be a day of judgment. Which of you are going to do that? It's rhetorical. The answer is none of them. Very few people will actually confront evil people for the evils that they commit. Sometimes when you have a just society, shortly just because they don't last that way for very long, it will actually punish people for their evil actions. But what we would call vigilantism is not a common thing throughout history. It's very rare people take justice into their own hands when wicked people do wicked things around them. More often than not, they try to mitigate the damage to themselves or flee. Those are the two things that you see more than anything else. It's just not very common for people to actually confront truly wicked, evil people with their misdeeds. I think that could partially be Job rebuking his friends as well, saying, if I were really wicked, you wouldn't be here saying this because you'd be afraid of me. But you are saying this to me because you know I'm not, because you know I'm not going to do anything to you. That is more of an assumption. Job doesn't explicitly state that, but it would be in character with the rest of this argument. In verse 32, it's another statement of the equality of man. He shall be brought to the grave, he shall remain in the tomb. Although here, he states specifically tomb. This man's going to have more than just a simple hole in the ground because he's a powerful, wicked man. The clods of the valley shall be sweet unto him. And clods, of course, is talking about dirt. I believe what he means by this is he's going to be, he's going to have ointments and perfumes and incenses put onto him before he dies so that even the ground will taste sweet. He's going to have this even after he dies. And every man shall draw after him. Now, draw is sort of a confusing term here. It can refer to sowing, to going away from something, to drawing near to it. It's sort of difficult to know exactly what he's stating. I think I've narrowed it down to what I believe is one of two solutions. He's saying either people will follow after him when he dies, sort of idolize him and raise him up as a paragon that they should live up to, or that he's just going to die like everyone else, just like everyone else did before him, and like everyone else is going to after him. The way he went, they're also going to go, because everyone dies. It could be either one. Either one could work, because either one states that the wicked and the righteous are just the same on earth. They have the same response, or that the wicked have more popularity and people want to be like them. And wicked men often do this with their tombs specifically to try and make people remember them. I don't know if anyone has seen the tomb of Napoleon. I don't know if you could even call it a tomb. It's more of a giant wagon that just sits on a large pedestal, and it has a big overview, kind of like not a shelf. I don't know, a porch pretty much, that is above it and looks over it and has a big railing. And the way he designed it, or he had it designed, you either have to look up at it because it's like 20 feet tall. You either have to look up at it from below, so you're always looking up to him, or you have to lean over the balcony to look down at him, so you're always bowing to him. That was his idea when he made it. You have to do one of those two to ever gaze upon him even in his death. That's the sort of pride that these men have, and that's the sort of tombs that they continue to have. That we know where Napoleon is buried, and his grave is still this way. And he is far from the only mighty man of the world to have enshrined himself in this way. But whichever one of these solutions, or whichever one of these conclusions Job is drawing to, either one could make complete sense in the context. But in verse 34, this is probably one of the most stinging parts of everything he said to his friends. How then comfort ye me in vain? Seen in your answers, there remaineth falsehood. So he gets to the conclusion of all of this, of pointing out why all of their arguments make no sense, pretty much kicking out their knees from under him. And he doesn't just leave them there to chew on that and to think about how they're wrong and reformulate their arguments. He gets to the end and he mocks them. He asserts that they don't have any foundation to what they're saying. They're just saying foolishness. How could they possibly comfort him or help him if they don't even know what they're talking about? As I've pointed out before, the older friends of Job didn't have anything else in their lives. Like when men, especially of that day, got very old, they served in an administrative and a counselor position. They could help organize things, and they could talk to people. Those were what they did. Now, those are not useless assets in many different situations. Counsel is important, especially at that time where the world was a very rough place to live. Having old wise men you could speak to who had lots of experience and knew the fathers of old who were centuries old, that was valuable to have. They could give you a lot of information. And it was all that his three friends really had. It's all that they were at this point. And so for him to point out that their words, their comforts, their counsel is meaningless, that they're foolish, they don't know what they're talking about, they don't understand logic, they can't put together arguments, and everything they say is wrong, it is clearly direct mockery aimed right at them. He's mocked them a little bit so far, but he's tired of essentially having a one-sided conversation where he's trying to appeal to them and they're trying to beat him down. He's decided at this point that he's simply going to return the same accusations they're throwing at him back at him, except his are going to be accurate. And we will see in verse 22, in the next study, that Eliphaz takes it very hard. Eliphaz's response is the most harsh one of any of his friends. He does not make any attempt to draw Job back, but neither did Bildad or Zophar before. But instead of just laying out what a wicked man does and insinuating it's Job, Eliphaz starts saying, you've done this, you committed this wicked act, you personally did this to people. He starts going through and very, very personally, directly saying it's your fault, you did this, you're evil, everything we've said is about you. He takes it very personally and gets very aggressive. And that's the last thing that Eliphaz says to his friend going forward. Bildad actually leaves it off with much less accusation, but that's only because his final response is 6 verses in length. It's the shortest one in this entire book. He doesn't have a lot to say at the end, and it's mostly him trying to retort a claim that Job makes, as opposed to further accusations. Eliphaz's is essentially the last set of accusations that they lay against Job, and it is easily the most harsh and aggressive one. But that is